There are men who spend their whole lives building something solid, and somewhere along the way they make the mistake of believing that solid means permanent. I built roads for 34 years, actual roads. I ran a paving crew for the county highway department out of Harlan, Kentucky, and then for a private contractor after I turned 50. I know what it takes to lay a foundation that holds through freeze and thaw, through heavy loads, through everything the seasons can throw at it. What I didn't understand until I was 63 years old, standing in a hospital parking garage on a Tuesday night in November, was that the people you pour yourself into don't always hold the same way concrete does. Sometimes they just drive right over you and never look back. It took my son making one phone call, and then the wrong person seeing me on the evening news for both of us to finally understand what I was actually worth. If you've ever been the person who shows up, who fills in every gap, who never asks for much in return, and still found yourself on the outside looking in at your own family, then you already know the particular loneliness I'm talking about. Welcome, brothers and fathers, to a story about learning your value the hard way. Before we get into the night, everything changed. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Give this video a like, and drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from. I read every single one. Now let me tell you about a man named Ray Dobbins. Ray is 68 years old, and he lives in a pale green ranch house on the edge of Mill Creek Township, about 7 miles outside of town. He retired 3 years ago from 31 years as a county paramedic. He still drives the same 2004 Silverado he bought used when his knees started going bad, and he keeps a trauma kit under the back seat out of pure habit. Ray volunteers 2 nights a week at the Mill Creek Community Shelter, which operates out of the basement of a Baptist church on Route 11. He doesn't teach. He doesn't counsel. He just shows up with a crock pot full of beef and potato soup and a folding table and feeds whoever comes through the door. He has done this every Tuesday and Thursday for 4 years without missing a single night. Ray doesn't talk about it. If you ask him why he does it, he looks at you like you asked him why he breathes. You do it because somebody needs it done, he says. That's the whole explanation. My name is Gerald Marsh. I am 63 years old, and for the last 34 years I have run asphalt. I started as a laborer laying base coats in the summer heat for $8 an hour, and I worked my way up to crew foreman and then to operations supervisor for a mid-sized paving company called Bluestone Road Services out of Harlan. I know every pothole season, every subgrade failure, every trick for getting a smooth mat in cold weather. My hands are permanently stained at the knuckles from asphalt release agent. My lower back has 2 compressed discs from decades on vibrating equipment. I am not an impressive-looking man. I drive a work truck. I own 4 pairs of the same steel-toed boot. I am not the kind of man who shows up at a country club dinner. My ex-wife Donna left me 9 years ago for a man named Preston Alcott. Preston is a 57-year-old commercial real estate developer who built 3 office parks in the suburbs of Lexington and sold them at exactly the right time. He drives a silver Porsche Cayenne. He wears linen shirts and keeps his silver hair cut close on the sides. And he has the kind of easy confidence that comes from never having had to worry about a payroll or a rained-out pour. When Donna moved into Preston's house in the Briarcrest subdivision outside Lexington, I didn't make a scene. I signed the papers, split the accounts, and kept driving to work. Our son, Derek, was 24 when the divorce happened. He was in graduate school at the University of Kentucky, studying business administration, which I was paying for. To his credit, Derek never turned cold on me all at once. It happened slowly, the way a road degrades not from one catastrophic event, but from 100 small stresses you don't notice until the surface cracks completely. Preston took Derek to a UK football box seat. Preston introduced Derek to his developer contacts. Preston quietly co-signed Derek's first business loan when I didn't have the kind of credit profile Preston did. I kept paying the graduate school tuition. I kept being the man Derek called when his furnace went out or his car needed a head gasket, and I was glad to do it. I told myself that was what fathers were for. I thought keeping the relationship warm was the same as the relationship being healthy. I was wrong about that for a long time. The call came on a Wednesday afternoon in the first week of November. I was in the cab of my work truck in the Bluestone yard, eating a sandwich and going over Friday's crew schedule. The sky was low and white, the kind of November sky that hasn't made up its mind about whether to rain or snow. Derek's name came up on my phone screen, and I answered it on the second ring the way I always did. "Hey, Dad." His voice was careful. That was the first thing I noticed. Not warm, not hurried, just careful, like he was measuring out each word before he let it leave his mouth. "Hey, son, what's going on?" I said. I was happy to hear from him. I always was. "So, Thanksgiving," he said. There was a pause. "Mom and Preston are doing a big thing this year. Preston's daughter is coming in from Atlanta with her husband and their kids, and his son is flying in from Seattle. Preston rented out a whole event space at the Briarcrest Club. They're doing a sit-down dinner for like 35 people. He's been planning this for months, Dad." I held my sandwich in one hand and looked out the windshield at the gray yard. "Okay," I said carefully. Derek cleared his throat. "So the thing is," he said, "Preston really wants to present a unified front, you know? He wants everyone at the same table, his kids, Mom's side, all of it. And it would be kind of complicated if I split Thanksgiving. If I had to leave early, or if there were two separate things happening." I held very still. "We have done Thanksgiving the same way since the divorce, Derek. You come to the house on Wednesday night. We do the full dinner Thursday at noon. Then you drive to your mom's. That's been our arrangement for 9 years. "I know, Dad," he exhaled. "But this is different. This is the first real family event Preston has organized that includes us. Mom really wants me there from the beginning. Not just for dessert. For the whole thing. And honestly, if I skip out early to come to yours, it creates this whole awkward energy for the rest of the day." I stared at the instrument panel of my truck. Awkward energy. 9 years of Thanksgiving dinners. 9 years of sitting across a table from my son, watching him grow into a man I was proud of, reduced to a potential source of awkward energy. "So what are you telling me, Derek?" I asked. He paused again. "I think I need to skip Harlan this year, Dad. Just take a year off. You understand, right? You can do something with Ray or whoever. It's just one Thanksgiving. Just one Thanksgiving." There are phrases that don't seem like weapons until they land. I set my sandwich down on the wrapper. "Derek," I said quietly, "I already bought the turkey. I have your grandmother's recipe for the corn pudding written out on an index card on my refrigerator. I have been saving that recipe for 23 years. I bought a bottle of that sour mash you like from the distillery in Lawrenceburg." "Dad, come on! Don't do that!" His voice sharpened just slightly. "You're making this harder than it needs to be. Just make other plans. It's not the end of the world." The line didn't go dead immediately. He said he loved me, which almost made it worse, and then he hung up. I sat in the cab of my work truck for a long time. The yard was quiet. I could hear the diesel hum of a generator on the far side of the equipment bay. The sky outside the windshield was the color of old concrete, and I watched it go from white to gray to the dark gray that means the light is leaving. If you have ever been told that your place at the table is a complication, brothers, that your presence creates awkward energy for somebody else's event, you know the particular weight of that. It doesn't fall like a stone. It seeps, slow and cold, like groundwater through a cracked foundation. Please take a moment to hit the like button if this story is reaching you. It helps get these words out to other men who might be sitting alone in their trucks right now, feeling the exact same thing. I did not sit at home. I could not sit in my house on Dawson Creek Road, looking at an index card with a corn pudding recipe on my refrigerator. On the Saturday before Thanksgiving, I loaded my truck with 3 jacks, 2 heavy-duty floor stands, a floor-mounted MIG welder I had hauled out of my garage, and 2 5-gallon buckets of basic hand tools, and I drove out to Ray Dobbins's place on the edge of Mill Creek Township. Ray was under the frame of a 2009 Ford F-350 that belonged to the church that hosted the shelter, trying to get a rusted exhaust clamp loose. Only his boots were visible from the end of the driveway. "You need a second set of hands?" I called out. His voice came out from under the truck, unhurried. Gerald Marsh showing up on a Saturday with a welder in his truck bed. "What did somebody do to you?" I didn't answer. I just walked over, laid down on my back on the cold concrete next to him, and grabbed the other side of the clamp. We worked in silence for 2 hours. Ray has that quality that is rarer than people realize he understands when a man does not want to be asked questions. He just hands you the right tool. When we finally crawled out from under the truck and Ray poured 2 mugs of bad coffee from the thermos he kept in his cab, he looked at me in the flat November light. "Derek," he said. It wasn't a question. I nodded. He looked down at the pavement. "You know," Ray said slowly, "I see a lot of men come through that shelter on Tuesday nights. Some of them got there through bad luck. Some of them got there through bad choices. But a lot of them got there because they spent 40 years carrying something that nobody ever said thank you for, and one day they just put it down in the wrong place and couldn't pick it back up." He took a sip of his coffee. "A man needs to know where he's genuinely wanted, not just where he's occasionally useful." I nodded at the truck. "So, what are we doing for Thanksgiving?" I looked at him. "The church runs a meal for the shelter families on Thanksgiving morning," Ray said. "Full spread. But the driver who normally hauls the tables and the equipment from storage over on Miller Road called in his shoulder surgery, got moved up. I've got nobody to make the run." He glanced at my truck. "You've got a vehicle that could fit 6 folding tables and 40 stackable chairs in one load." I looked at my truck. I looked at Ray. "What time do we start?" I asked. He squinted at me. 6 in the morning. You'll want the heavy gloves. That storage unit doesn't have heat." Thanksgiving morning was cold. Not dangerously cold, but honest cold. The kind that makes your breath come out thick and your fingers slow. Ray was already at the storage unit on Miller Road when I pulled up at 5:55, his breath fogging in the beam of his flashlight. We loaded in silence, stacking the chairs 6 high, breaking down the long folding tables and sliding them along the truck bed rails. We made 2 runs. By 8 o'clock, we had the church basement set up with 8 tables in 2 rows and a serving line along the back wall. Then Ray produced aprons from somewhere, and we were in the kitchen. I have not cooked Thanksgiving for 35 people before. I am a decent cook for 2. By 10 in the morning, I was sweating through my flannel shirt, stirring a pot of green beans the size of a small bathtub, and trying to understand a handwritten recipe for sweet potato casserole that Ray had gotten from a woman named Mrs. Elva Birch, who was 81 and had been cooking for the shelter since it opened and could no longer stand long enough to do it herself. By noon, the families started coming in. There were 12 families in total that year, single mothers with small children, a grandfather raising 3 grandchildren by himself, a man about my age who had lost his job in the spring and his apartment by August. We served, we refilled, we washed dishes and refilled again. At around 2 in the afternoon, a young woman from the local television station came in with a cameraman. Her name was Kelsey Brand, and she was doing a segment on community Thanksgiving services in the county. Ray spotted her first and immediately became very interested in a stack of plates that needed to be carried to the far end of the room. I was at the serving line with a ladle in my hand when Kelsey came over with her microphone. "Excuse me, sir," she said. "I'm Kelsey Brand from WLEX. We're doing a Thanksgiving segment on volunteers in the area. Could I ask you a couple of questions on camera?" I looked at the ladle. I looked at the camera. "Go ahead," I said. She smiled. "How long have you been volunteering here?" "Today's actually my first time here," I said honestly. "My friend Ray runs the operation. I just came to help move furniture and ended up in the kitchen." She laughed. She seemed surprised. "Well, according to the shelter director, this meal served 38 people today, many of them families with children, and it wouldn't have happened without the 2 of you. What made you decide to spend your Thanksgiving here instead of with family?" I looked at the camera for a moment. "My family had other commitments this year," I said. "Perfectly good ones. Big dinner, lots of people. They didn't need me at the table. But Ray here had 38 people who did. I figured I'd go where I was actually needed." She nodded, looking genuinely struck by that. I didn't think anything more of it. The cameraman took some footage of the room, of Ray ladling soup with his apron strings dangling, of the kids eating pie, and then they left. Ray came over and stood next to me. "My family had other commitments," he said deadpan. "Gerald." I went back to the dishes. It was close to 8 o'clock that night when I finally got back to my house on Dawson Creek Road. The house was quiet and warm. I had leftover sweet potato casserole in a foil pan in the passenger seat, a gift from Mrs. Elva Birch, who had shown up in the afternoon just to supervise, and had sent me home with food, the way older women do when they want to take care of someone without making a fuss about it. I put the casserole in the refrigerator. I poured a glass of water. I sat down at the kitchen table in the quiet of the house. I had not looked at my phone since noon. When I picked it up, the screen showed 22 missed calls. 14 were from Derek, 6 were from Donna. 2 were from a number I didn't recognize, which I later found out was Preston Alcott's personal cell. I stared at that screen for a long moment. Then the phone vibrated in my hand. "Derek," I answered. Derek's voice came through immediately, fast and tightly wound in a way I hadn't heard from him since he was a teenager. "Dad. Oh my God. Where have you been?" "I've been at a shelter in Mill Creek Township," I said. "We served Thanksgiving dinner to 38 people. What's going on?" There was a sharp exhale. "Dad, WLEX ran their segment tonight, during the 5 o'clock news. They ran it again at 6. It was you, and that Ray guy. The reporter talked about how you gave up your Thanksgiving to volunteer because your family had other commitments. Those were your words, Dad. They put it on the air. Your words." I set my water glass down. "I see." "Preston's business partner was watching the 6 o'clock news," Derek said, his voice dropping. "He called Preston. Said he saw a segment about this man who spent Thanksgiving feeding homeless families because his family didn't need him at the table. And Preston's partner recognized me from the company LinkedIn page and looked up my last name and connected it. He called Preston and said, 'Is that your wife's ex-husband?' Derek's voice went tight. Preston told Mom. Mom has been crying for 2 hours. She says her friends from the garden club are texting her asking what happened. Why your dad was at a shelter instead of with us. It looks like we threw you out, Dad. Like we didn't want you." I breathed in slowly through my nose. I looked at the index card on my refrigerator. My mother's corn pudding recipe in her handwriting. 23 years old, the ink faded, but still perfectly legible. I looked at it for a moment. "Derek," I said, "I didn't say anything untrue to that reporter." "You didn't have to say anything at all," he said, and his voice had an edge now. "You could have just been a volunteer for 1 day without making it a whole thing." "I made it nothing," I said calmly. "I helped move tables, and I served food. A reporter asked me why I was there instead of with my family, and I told her the truth. You told me to make other plans because my being at Thanksgiving would create awkward energy for Preston's event. I made other plans. That's the full story, son." Derek was quiet for a beat. "Dad," he said, and his voice shifted, dropping back toward something younger. "Something I hadn't heard in a while. That's not exactly what I meant. You know that. Tell me what you meant," I said quietly. He didn't answer that directly. He said, "Preston is really upset. This reflects on him and his business community. People are asking why his wife's ex-husband was alone on Thanksgiving feeding strangers while Preston was throwing a dinner party. It makes him look like—" I let the silence hold for a moment. "It makes him look like what?" I asked. "Like a man who got between a father and his son at the holidays." I picked up my water glass again. "Because, Derek, I want to be very clear with you. That is exactly what happened. I'm not angry about it. I made my peace with it while I was loading chairs at 6 this morning. But that is what happened, and no amount of explaining it away changes it." There was another pause. Then, "Dad." He sounded smaller than he had on the Wednesday call. A lot smaller. We're actually having a problem over here. The heat pump at the house, my house, it went out this afternoon around 3. I've been trying to get an emergency HVAC tech out here all evening, but nobody's available on Thanksgiving. It's 42 degrees outside, and it's already down to 58 in the house. I've got the electric space heaters going, but they're barely doing anything. I was thinking I know you have that big commercial propane heater from the job site. I sat with that for a moment. That commercial torpedo heater I had in the garage, the same one I'd used to keep his apartment warm 2 winters ago when his pipes froze and I drove 40 minutes in the snow with it in my truck bed because he called me at 11 o'clock at night. I know what you're thinking, I said, and I want you to hear me clearly because I'm not saying this out of spite. I said it calmly. The same voice I use when I'm explaining to a young laborer why a certain grade of asphalt is wrong for a particular application. I'm 63 years old, Derek. I have driven 40 minutes in the snow at midnight for you. I have paid for your education, and your car repairs, and your first apartment deposit, and I have never once made you feel like a burden for any of it. I did all of that because I love you, and because that is what a father does. But tonight, I'm tired. I just spent 14 hours on my feet feeding strangers on Thanksgiving because my own family had other plans for me. The commercial heater is staying in my garage. Preston Alcott is a wealthy man. He builds office parks. I am quite sure he can reach someone who can solve a heating problem, or he can drive Derek to a hotel. That's what resources are for. Dad, Derek said. His voice cracked slightly. Just slightly. That's not fair. I looked at the corn pudding recipe. Fair, I repeated. Derek, I bought a turkey. I had your grandmother's recipe on my refrigerator. I had that sour mash from Lawrenceburg waiting in the cabinet. I told you I was looking forward to it, and you told me that my coming would make things complicated. And you told me to make other plans, because you're an adult, and you had the right to say that. I'm also an adult. I'm making other plans right now. The line was quiet for 5 seconds. 10. Get a hotel for tonight, I said, and my voice was not cold. It was, if anything, gentler than it had been. Get the HVAC company out in the morning. Call me in a few days when things have settled, and we'll talk. I mean that. We'll actually talk, but not tonight. I didn't wait for him to say goodbye. I pressed the red button and set the phone face down on the kitchen table. Then I reached over and turned the ringer off. I sat there in the quiet of my kitchen on Dawson Creek Road, and I ate a small bowl of Mrs. Elva Birch's sweet potato casserole cold out of the foil pan because I was too tired to heat it up, and it was, without question, the best thing I had eaten in months. The morning came up clear. The day after Thanksgiving, brilliant and cold. The sky, that particular hard blue you only get in November when the clouds have been blown entirely out. I made coffee in my kitchen and sat by the window the way I used to do when Derek was small, and I was up before him on weekend mornings, waiting for him to come padding down the hall in his socks. I turned my phone back on. There were more messages. Donna had sent 2 long ones telling me I had humiliated her in front of her garden club friends, which told me everything I needed to know about what she was worried about. Derek had sent one message at midnight that started as a defense and then, somewhere around the 3rd paragraph, began to turn into something else. I read it twice. I didn't reply to it yet. I folded it somewhere in the back of my mind where I keep things that need time to become clear. I drove out to Ray's place that morning with a box of donuts from the bakery in Mill Creek, because Ray had not gotten to eat much at the shelter the day before. He never does. He's too busy making sure everyone else has enough. I found him on his front porch in a heavy flannel shirt and work boots, drinking coffee and looking out at the bare trees. I set the box of donuts on the railing beside him. He opened the box, looked at the donuts, looked at me. "You're on the news," he said. "I know." Station ran the segment 3 times. He picked up a glazed donut. "You said your family had other commitments." "I did." He bit into the donut and chewed and said nothing for a while. Then, "Boy called?" I nodded. Ray set his coffee mug down on the railing and looked out at the trees for a long moment. "I had a son," he said quietly. "He died in 2003. Cardiac event on a job site. 31 years old. And I will tell you something, Gerald. Not a day goes by that I don't think about him. But I will also tell you that I have watched a lot of fathers in this county tie themselves in knots, trying to earn back something from their grown children that should never have had to be earned in the first place." He looked at me. "You are not a supplement. You are not the backup plan. You are somebody's father, and you are allowed to know your own worth." I looked at the bare oak tree at the edge of Ray's yard. There is something about hearing the right words from the right person at the right moment that settles into you differently than it does from a book or a platitude. I had known Ray Dobbins for 11 years. He had never said anything like that to me before. He didn't need to until now. "I'm not walking away from Derek," I said. "Didn't say you were," Ray said. He picked up his coffee. "There's a difference between walking away and standing still, and making somebody come back to you on honest terms. I drove home. I sat at the kitchen table, and I wrote Derek a letter on actual paper, the old-fashioned way, because some things shouldn't be said over a phone screen. I told him that I loved him without condition, and that I always would, and that nothing about the last week changed that. I told him that I was done, however, being the man who showed up in every emergency and disappeared from every celebration. I told him that I didn't need to be the loudest presence in his life or the most impressive one. I only needed to be a real one. I told him that when he was ready to have that conversation, I was here, and I would be here, because I wasn't going anywhere. I was just going to stop apologizing for taking up space. I sealed the letter in an envelope and drove to the post office on Main Street and mailed it. 3 weeks later, on a Sunday afternoon in December, Derek's car pulled into my driveway on Dawson Creek Road. I heard the tires on the gravel from the kitchen where I was doing dishes, and I looked out the window, and I stood there watching him get out of the car. He was wearing a heavy coat I hadn't seen before. He stood in the driveway for a moment, looking at the house, and then he walked up to the door and knocked. He knocked on his father's door, because he understood now that he needed to. I dried my hands on a dish towel and went to the door and opened it. His face was different from how it had been in the fall. Not softer exactly. More honest. "I got your letter," he said. "I know," I said. "Come inside. It's cold." He came in. I made coffee. We sat at the kitchen table, and we talked for a long time, the way we hadn't talked in years. Not about Preston, not about the news segment, not about the heat pump, about real things. About the years when he was small. About his grandfather, my father, who paved his first road in 1959 and worked until he was 68. About what it had felt like for Derek to grow up watching me leave in the dark and come home in the dark, and what he had never understood about that until recently. About what I had never understood about what he needed from me that I hadn't given him. It was not a comfortable conversation. It was an honest one, which is rarer and more valuable. He left at 9 o'clock. At the door, he stopped and looked at me with his hand on the frame. "I'm sorry, Dad," he said. He said it simply, the way men say things when they mean them without decoration. "For Thanksgiving." For the way I said it. I nodded. "I know, son." We didn't hug. We shook hands, and it meant more than a hug would have, because it was what we both had in us that night, and it was real. I stood at the door and watched his headlights back out of the gravel driveway and turn onto the road and disappear behind the tree line. Then I went inside to the quiet kitchen. The index card with my mother's corn pudding recipe was still on the refrigerator, held up by a magnet shaped like the state of Kentucky. I had spent 9 years making myself smaller in my own life, trying to fit through a door that kept being moved. What I learned, standing in a church basement on Thanksgiving with a ladle and an apron, is that a man does not discover his worth by convincing the people who undervalue him to change their minds. He discovers it by finding the places and the people where that worth was never in question. I had lost a version of my son, the version that saw me only as convenient, somewhere between November and December. But I had found the real one, the one who knocked on his father's door on a Sunday, at the kitchen table over coffee, on honest terms. And Ray Dobbins was still on his porch every morning, and Mrs. Elva Birch had already called to ask if I would be back at the shelter in December, and the roads I had spent 34 years paving were still out there holding up under everything the season threw at them. A man doesn't need to be celebrated. He needs to be real. And for the first time in a long time, brothers, I was. Thank you for listening to this story. If it brought up something you've been carrying, if you've ever had to learn your own value the hard way, if you've ever been the man who was needed in every emergency and excluded from every celebration, I want to hear from you. Leave a comment below. Share your story. These conversations matter more than you know. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next one. Stay honest, stay steady, and go where you are genuinely needed.